Let's say you're new to hand loading and you just start flipping through a manual and you're like, oh, hey, I want to figure out a new rifle that I would like to get to start hand loading. Well, you flip through and there are so many calibers, so many options. What do you pick? In today's video, we're going to go through and we're going to figure out what would be a good starter cartridge for someone just getting into hand loading. Now, recently, I started off with the 7 Rem Mag just because that's what I had. Growing up, I had access to a 6.5 Creedmoor, so we loaded a 6.5 Creedmoor. When I was just starting out hunting, we had a 243 Winchester. So, what did I start hand loading on originally? I started off on a 243 Winchester. Why? Because that's what I had, and that's what was the easiest, most accessible thing to me. So, first off, if you've already got something, start with hand loading that. But let's say you didn't have something and you wanted to get a new rifle to start hand loading. Well, let's get into it. So, like we said, we went through and we found a few cartridges that seem to be some of the best starter cartridges for hand loading and just in general. So, we have the 308 Winchester, 7.8 Remington, 6.5 Creedmoor, 6mm Creedmoor. There was a few of you that in the poll we put out said that the 6GT is a great one, and then the 223 Remington. So these are going to be graded on a scale of 1 to 10. 1 is, of course, the worst, 10 is the best, and then we have component availability, factory ammunition. Now, why does factory ammo matter when we're talking about hand loading? Well, if you're trying out different loads or different bullets, sometimes the easiest way to find out if your rifle will have potential with a specific bullet is to just get a box of factory ammo and try it. Then we have recoil, because if you're learning to hand load, especially in these, you're going to want to shoot quite often. And by shooting quite often, you're going to be having high round counts. So recoil towards the end of the day, if you've shot 100 rounds of 308 versus 100 rounds of 300 Win Mag, 308 is going to be a lot more fun to shoot. And then rifle availability, and then shooting targets. So this is like shooting steel out to 1,000 yards. Then we have hunting and our totals. So we're going to add up all of the points from these different categories, and from there we'll get the totals, and that one is going to tell us what's the best. First up is the 308 Winchester. For component availability and factory ammunition, both of those are going to be a 10 out of 10. They're everywhere, it's always available, and realistically, any store you go into is going to have some form of 308 Winchester, whether it's the powder and the bullets, whether it's some form of factory ammunition, it's always going to be there. For recoil, it's a 7 out of 10. Obviously, there are other cartridges that have less recoil, so just for that reason, it's a 7. Rifle availability is a 10 out of 10. Now, that's because not only is it everywhere, but you have different types of rifles. You have more of your semi-automatic platforms and then your bolt action platforms. You can also find it in cheap rifles and high-end rifles. So regardless of how you want your rig to look, 308 Winchester is always going to be an option. It is known to be a super accurate cartridge. So out at 1,000 yards, you're going to be able to see your misses. You're going to be able to see your hits. Overall, 10 out of 10. For hunting, again, it's that 30 caliber. It's going to give you that diameter. You're going to get good enough velocities with bullets up to 175, 180 grain bullets that within normal hunting ranges, this is going to work. So overall, we got 57 points. Now, the 708, which is just a 308 necked down to 7mm, it has the components available, but it's not going to be as common to find powders or things that as the 308 Winchester. Same thing for factory ammo. You can find the ammo. You're not going to have as big of a variety or as many bullet options, but it's going to be on the shelf. Recoil, it's roughly about the same as the 308, so 7. Rifle availability, you're going to find it in some of the more cheap rifles. You're going to be able to find them in most places. They're just the high end options and the platform options really aren't going to be there. And out to 1,000 yards, 8 out of 10. It can be accurate, they can be awesome, but it wasn't necessarily built with 1,000 yard shot in mind. And then for hunting, we're an 8.5 because yes, it'll work for elk, it'll work for deer, but getting into those bigger animals, it just doesn't have the bullet diameter that the 308 does. So for that reason, we're an 8.5 with a total score of 46.5. Now, for components for this 6.5 Creedmoor, it's not quite as good as the 308 Winchester, and that is purely because the 30 caliber has so many bullet options, and the 6.5 millimeter, it has options, but it's not as many as the 308. So it's a 9 out of 10. Factory ammunition, 6.5 Creedmoor's everywhere. You're going to find options. You're going to find different companies making it. So 10 out of 10. Recoil's roughly about the same. That's going to be kind of a theme here is most of these cartridges are fairly low recoiling. Rifle availability is a 9 out of 10, purely because, yes, you can find it in expensive rifles. You can find it in cheap rifles. You're not going to find it in a whole lot of platforms, though. You're not going to find it in an AR-10 just sitting on the shelf. Although it's possible to get something like that chambered in a Creedmoor, it's just not going to be right off the shelf. Here it is. At 1,000 yards, I have a 9 out of 10. They can be amazing, super accurate cartridges out at that range, but on those hot summer days, you do get a little bit of that mirage, and you're not going to be able to see those misses nearly as well as that 308. And then for hunting, let's be honest. Yes, you can hunt elk with it. Yes, the 6.5 Swede is used for moose. But if you had to pick a 308 or a 6.5 Creedmoor, I would give the money to the 308. So again, we're 7 out of 10. It's a capable hunting cartridge, just not for that bigger game. So we have a score of 51 points at the end. So not too bad, but still that 308's winning. The 6 millimeter Creedmoor and the GT, we're going to kind of lump those two together because, well, the GT brass isn't really available because it's a great competition cartridge, but within 500 yards. It's 1,000 yard accuracy. They are good, but those bullets are so light and so small in diameter that seeing misses is really going to be hard. And then hunting here, 5.5 for both of those. It's good for deer and like pronghorn, but not much else. It does work for bigger game, but it's far from ideal. Looking at the 6 millimeter Creedmoor component availability, it's really good. You're stuck with that 6 millimeter, so there's sometimes not a whole lot of options in way of what brand you want to buy, what bullet weight. Um, Looking at factory ammunition, where you can find the 6.5 Creedmoor, you'll be able to find the 6 millimeter Creedmoor. It might not have as many options, but it's still going to be available. Recoil, it's going to be less than these up here, so you're going to have an 8 out of 10, which is a little better. Rifle availability, kind of the same idea with the Creedmoor. The 6 mil Creedmoor, you can find it in stores. It's going to be in some cheaper rifles typically, but it is available. It just doesn't have the platforms. And so both of those, we have 32.5 for the 6GT and a 47.5 for the Creedmoor. One thing of note for this GT is that most of your rifles and setups are going to have to be in a custom rifle. So I know there might be one or two companies out there that do make it, but realistically, you're going to have to get a custom rifle for that. And then the 223 Remington, it is, your stereotypical 5.56, 22 caliber. It's everywhere. Everywhere you look, you'll have factory ammo. You'll have all the components. It is very low recoiling, especially if you get a suppressor or a muzzle brake on it. It's going to be really pleasant to shoot. Rifle availability, kind of like that 308. It's everywhere. You have expensive rifles, cheap rifles. You have semi-auto, single shot, bolt action. You name it, you can probably find it in 223. Out at 1,000 yards, I know they do use it in competition out at extended ranges. However, where it's a 22 caliber, it's going to be very light. It's not going to have the same splash as a 308. So realistically, it's just going to be harder to track where you hit, where you miss. And then for hunting, it's really only good for varmints. Yes, I know people do use it for whitetails, and in some states you can legally hunt big game with a 22 caliber center fire rifle. But come on, it's a 223. You're not going to be using it for big game typically. So it's going to be a 4 out of 10. It's not super capable in hunting, but it does score a 50 out of all that. So here we have the final scores. 308 is 57, 708, 65 Creedmoor, 6 GT. That came in last, but that's just because it relies on custom rifles way too much. Here you have the 6 Creedmoor, and then you have the 223. Now, personally, I think the 308 is going to be the best overall for starting out. If you're looking for a new rifle or a new cartridge to get into reloading, the 308, it's not only going to be very forgiving, but it's going to be fun to shoot and it's going to be pleasant. You're not going to get beat up too much, and you can use it for target shooting, you can use it for hunting, and you'll have enough gun to get it done. My underrated pick, I would say the 708. It might not have the best scores, but if you can find the components, if you can find the factory ammunition, if you would like, it does really well across the board. It's just not as available as the Creedmoors. It's not as cheap, you could say, as the 223, but it's kind of that sleeper pick. They do really well. They have that good diameter. You're going to be able to take the same animals as the Creedmoor and everything smaller, but you can reach up and you can get into elk, bigger deer species, things like that. So if I were you, I would go with something like a 308 Winchester as my new rifle if I was getting into hand loading.